I now have the great honour of introducing our next speaker, who of course will need very little introduction, the renowned Pacific climate champion, the Right Honourable Enele Sopoaga MP, who's firmly placed Tuvalu at the forefront of the international climate change movement, bringing international attention to the Blue Pacific and the imminent threats posed by climate change. Right Honourable Sopoaga was elected to the Tuvaluan Parliament in 2010, was sworn in as Prime Minister in August 2013 and served as Prime Minister until very recently. As Prime Minister, he worked tirelessly on international efforts to address problems resulting from global warming in Tuvalu and across the Pacific, establishing Tuvalu's National Advisory Council on Climate Change in 2014 and representing Tuvalu at numerous UN climate change conferences as lead spokesperson for climate change action. Tuvalu hosted the 50th Pacific Islands Forum in August this year, where he played a pivotal role in ensuring that the forum communique had a key focus on climate change. It's a great privilege for our membership to host the Right Honourable Sopoaga and his wife, Madam Sopoaga, who is in the audience today, and we're delighted he will open our national conference. Please join me in warmly welcoming him to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mistress of our Ceremony, for that very, very comprehensive and kind introduction. Talofa, I bring greetings from the people of Tuvalu. They are still there on the islands, not yet floating. But first of all, I too want to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting. And may I humbly suggest that paying respects to these landowners is not enough. It is certainly my hope that this beautiful country will do justice to recognize and to pay full respects to the owners of this land. In Tuvalu, as you may know, we managed to throw off the shackles of colonialism in 1978. Perhaps it is now time for proper recognition for the traditional owners of these lands. Thank you. Then I want to thank ACFID, their organizer, CEO and the president, and all of you members of the organization for kindly inviting me to your national conference. Tuvalu has a long-standing relationship with a number of development assistance organizations that are members of ACFID. The Tuvalu Association of NGOs, TANGO, has been working with a number of Australian-based NGOs, and we, the people of Tuvalu, fully appreciate that partnership. And may I also put on record my sincere gratitude and great appreciation to the people and the governments of Australia, past and on, for the enormous development assistance that our small island nation of Tuvalu has received from you over the many years. You have made lives easy in Tuvalu and made a great difference, and I want to thank you very much indeed. We, Tuvalu, are friends of Australia. There are Tuvaluans living in Australia. They have their grandchildren that are Australians. There are Australians living in Tuvalu. They have their grandchildren also in Tuvalu. And of course, we support the Wallabies. Unfortunately, we don't share the outcome of the World Cup. But as you may be aware, I hosted the Pacific Island Leaders Forum in Tuvalu, as we heard from the introduction, just a month ago in August, with the theme, Securing Our Future in the Pacific. There are a number of observations that can be made from this meeting, which I am happy to share during this talk, as this platform, your conference, provides a good opportunity for me to overview my concerns and hopes for the Pacific region. Prior to hosting the Leaders Forum in Tuvalu, we in Tuvalu held two events. The first was a climate change youth forum, and the other was a climate change sautalanga, or discussion. The youth forum was meant for Tuvaluan youth, young girls, young boys, to come together and assess their aspirations for the future in the light of climate change impacts on atoll nations like Tuvalu. The Youth Forum was very productive, and it was a very successful event, allowing for a strong voice from our young people to express their concerns and to state their aspirations about their future. The clear message that came from the youth is that they wanted to preserve their culture and their identity as Tuvaluans. They did not want to become citizens of another country. This view, this message, was taken to the UN Secretary General's Climate Change Summit in New York. And I was happy to secure funding and support to send 10 young girls and boys to New York to express and share their story to the world. The climate change sautalanga, on the other hand, was meant for the leaders to precurse the Pacific Island Leaders Meeting, the leaders of the Pacific Island Forum. Most of the leaders from the Pacific, of course, attended this meeting. The notable exceptions, unfortunately, were Scott Morrison and Jacinda Ardern. Although Prime Minister Ardern did express an interest for time change so that she could attend. We discussed many important issues relating to climate change and the Pacific. We also developed and issued a Pacific SIDS declaration which had clear positions on a ban on the construction of new coal-fired power plants and coal mines, and to hold subsidizing fossil fuels. You may wish to check the text of the declarations. We called on financial institutions in the Pacific and worldwide to divest from fossil fuels and reinvest in renewable energy and energy-efficient technology. We strongly believed, the leaders of the Pacific, that is the way, the pathway for the world to move forward in order to avoid the catastrophic impacts of climate change. We acknowledge that climate change represents the single greatest threat to the security and survival of Pacific Island countries. We expressed concern about the impacts of climate change not only on foreshore and coastal islands and biodiversity, but also on tuna stocks in our region, which is the basis of our economies in the Pacific. We called for measures to provide compensation for Pacific Island countries that have lost tuna stocks due to the effects of climate change. You look at the media this morning, it is happening everywhere. This is going to cause significant devastations to our economies and possibly to the security of island nations in the Pacific. Serious implications are expected if we didn't address climate change with urgency. These were some of the issues that arose from our sautalanga, our climate change discussion. We held this sautalanga to ensure that the true voice of the Pacific was heard without the interference of our large neighbors. We were clearly right in this respect, because the Pacific Leaders Forum communique that followed a day later, as you may have heard, is a very poor reflection of the Pacific's true concerns about climate change. As the PIF chairman, myself, I was stunned and I want to share this with you, by the un-Pacific tenor and manner of the Australian Prime Minister to water down the wording of the communique and to limit the concerns about climate change, much against the concerns and the tears that were set by the Pacific Island leaders. I thought, perhaps too ambitiously, that hosting the 50th PIF in Tuvalu, my country, which is perhaps the most threatened atoll nation due to impacts of climate change, would secure genuine sympathy and loyal understanding on our Tuvalu plea over the many years, calling for urgent and concrete response to climate change. And I thought hosting it in Tuvalu and showcasing our extreme vulnerability to the leaders of the world following just after the visit of the UN Secretary General to my country, Tuvalu and the Pacific, this opportunity would be a grand chance for the PIF leaders' family to come together to translate meaningfully in the Pacific way of family coming together to share our concerns and problems meaningfully and translate ideas like those under the step-up doctrine into some concrete leadership against climate change. Sadly, making money took over precedence over saving lives of people in these seats. That is a great concern. There was also deliberate attempt to play small to the contribution of the green climate funding and other international funding that is so crucial to saving lives on small island countries. We were a little bit put back by that response. And of course, following that, there was outburst calling for island countries to accept money and perhaps compromise their positions on climate change. $500 million offer to the Pacific is nothing compared to the cost of damages that have already been inflicted on the lives and livelihood of the people of the Pacific. I thought the outburst that came from one of the ministers was irresponsible and unbecoming. And I want to say to this, keep your money. Tuvalu and the Pacific do not need to see these perks being used as an excuse for us to compromise our job, our responsibility to make sure the security and survival of our people on this planet. There were other outcomes that are so important that I want also to reflect. Perhaps it is in the text of my speech remarks this morning. Please have a look at them. And one of these that I want to use the remaining part of my time is the intrusion and interference of outside forces into the Pacific, particularly taking advantage of the unique vulnerabilities of small island countries. China was there, other influences were there, and you know, straight after the forum, two of the small island countries changed allegiances from their traditional friends and partner, Republic of China, to mainland China. What for? Mainly to take advantage of the offers of money diplomacy for economic activities, for promises of more aid, ODA. And I want to use these opportunities to call on the Pacific Island leaders as well as on our neighbors, Australia and New Zealand, to please do more. Step up and reset policies must be concretized in meaningful actions on the grounds in order to save the people of the Pacific, including my own country, Tuvalu. Let me also encourage the Pacific Island leaders themselves, including my own new government, to keep up the fight against climate change. to look at climate change not as a source for financing. Climate change is never and is not going to be the source of making money. It is a survival, it is a security, justice for the rights of the people. And we need to continue to work together with the rest of the world. Climate change and sources to address it is not ODA. It is a responsibility under the principles that we all came together more than 20 years ago in Rio to say the polluter must pay. The polluter must pay under the responsibility to do the right thing. We cannot allow this to the polluters to. Of course, I fully appreciate what our neighbors have contributed to the Pacific for their development. But climate change financing is not ODA. It has to match with also actions at home to cut down on emissions, because the more pollution we keep on pouring into the atmosphere, the more adaptation countries like Tuvalu would have to make. So for the work of ACFID, I want to say this. Thank you very much indeed for your advocacy. Please keep on the good work. There are other areas that we discussed in the forum and are great priority concerns in health, in non-communicable diseases, gender justice, women's rights, family planning, and reproductive health. These are some of the issues that continue to face the Pacific Island countries, including Tuvalu. And as a former educator myself, the importance of literacy and numeracy are critical to the capacity development of our future generations. Quality education is a critical adaptation strategy. It is a right for all Pacific young people, youth, to be properly educated so that they can respond to climate change with wise decisions. They need our help. So therefore, friends, I'm sorry the picture that I am giving you is really not a clear picture, but it is a good fight. And I think we are, including ACFID, doing very good service to the people of the Pacific through continuing this advocacy, because it is important for our peoples in the Pacific. I want to perhaps leave and sum up my discussion with 3 points. First, I believe the Australian government, through its step-up policy, must translate this into meaningful actions with urgent new and additional climate change financing for the Pacific. The money that we have been offered is repackaging of existing funding from somewhere. You keep it, put this in this response, it will deny other activities already in the ODA package. So the message that I call on the government to please put additional and new funding for climate change that is accessible, predictable, and adequate for real adaptation on the grounds. The second point, the commitment to act progressively on a just transition from fossil fuels, particularly from coal burning, as in the 50th PIF communique towards a net zero greenhouse gas emissions, must be honored. Otherwise, we are not in the Pacific community. Because the more coals you continue to burn to make money, the closer our people, our young people, are to their total demise. And the last one, the imperative for durable, genuine, and meaningful partnerships between governments is also fundamental. We need to partner. And I encourage ACFID to please also help your colleague partners in the Pacific, NGOs, to work, because the real actions is taken by those on the grounds, including those on the outer islands in Tuvalu. We must work together to create fossil fuel divestment strategies. We need to develop climate change insurance to help people recover from events. We need adaptation strategies that respond to the needs of local communities. We need legal assistance to fight those that threaten our future. We must all do every bit that we can to ensure the Pacific survives. And as I have been saying in many conferences worldwide, in the Pacific, United Nations, and all parts of the world, if we save Tuvalu, we save the world. Whaftai Tuvalu Modetua. Thank you very much.
Mark Purcell. Do you have time for a few questions?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
His Excellency, after that very powerful and incisive speech, has time to take a couple of questions from the floor. So if you could please say your name and organisation and address the conversation, His Excellency. Come on, don't be shy. Maybe, Your Excellency, I could just kick off. You said that the money put on the table by Australia, the $500 million, was not, in the aid package, was not new money. Could you explain a little bit more how Pacific Island leaders understood that money?
Thank you, Mark. But let me acknowledge also, thank you very much, CEO Purcell, for kindly inviting me. I understand, and many of the Pacific leaders understand, this funding is repackaged from already the existing ODA to the Pacific on some other sectors. It's almost like taking this from one basket and turning it into funding. And that it has nothing to do with climate change. It's part of the ODA package that has already been there, identified. And of course we appreciate, and as I've said, we always appreciate what Australia people and governments have been doing to support the Pacific Islands development. But the issue of climate change, really you have to contextualize this, because the costs of adaptation, for example, in Tuvalu, to coastal erosion and attacks on vegetations, and re-educating our young people, and looking at the need for legislations that can counter these measures and provide security for the people is enormous compared to this. Of course, there are attempts to move away from multilateral funding like Green Climate Fund. We understand what is happening in the Green Climate Fund, but let's focus on the spirit of that fund, which is really a survival funding for those vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And perhaps, as I have been saying, countries like Australia, New Zealand, they have a very powerful voice in the United Nations, could use that to make right what is seen as wrong in the Green Climate Fund, but not to step outside of these multilateral mechanisms to help the most vulnerable. So funding that it has been offered, $500 million over the next 5 years, is much appreciated. But we have to make sure these are properly clarified. We need clarity whether this will go into the Pacific, into the grounds for actions, for work there, or this would only be translated through consultancies or to the boards and the money would, practically not leave Australia, by the way, would just be on accounting papers, actually not delivered onto the grounds. That's my feel of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The lady at the back, if somebody could give her a microphone, please.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Your Excellency, my name's Kate Lee. I'm the Executive Officer of the Trade Union Movement's International Solidarity Organisation, known as Union Aid, a broader feeder. Thank you so much for coming and addressing us today. We most deeply respect the efforts of the trade union, of the Pacific Island leadership in the forum some months ago. And I can assure you that many of us in Australia also shed tears along with you and the other leadership at the failure of our government to act more strongly on this effort. But I want to take up the point you made, one of your three main points at the end about just transition. This is a crucial issue, an area for Australia as a country that, as you know, is deeply dependent on a fossil fuel industry that goes right back into our colonialist history. So I'm interested to know more about your thoughts and about the leadership of Pacific Island nations in how you plan to or want to advance this discussion with the Australian government. Many in Australia are advancing this and trying to push this debate more strongly forward, but of course any allied work with Pacific Island nations is very important in shifting the debate in Australia. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you very much, Madam. That's a very critical question, and I think strikes at the basis of the necessity, the imperative for concrete actions against climate change, and that is to look at a new environmentally friendly mix of energy. And we in the Pacific, I certainly strongly believe Australia is very well endowed and well resourced in sources of renewable energy. And we also recognize there is a plethora and strong capacity at a technical level, technologically, as well to move towards use, development, and deployment and use of renewable energy technologies. And unfortunately, this capacity and resource is not offered the opportunity because most of the subsidies, as we all know, is going towards fossil fuels at the moment. If that can be shifted to the development and more research on renewable energy efficiency technologies, I strongly believe this would provide great benefits in our efforts to address the cause of global warming and cut down on emissions into the atmosphere. I certainly believe that is a way to go, and we stand wondering why this is not allowed to happen. And we are being asked in the Pacific, for example, we have NDCs under the Paris Agreement, and Tuvalu and many other small island countries are asked by everybody, members of the UN, the COP, United Nations members, to cut down on our emissions for us to reach targets of renewable energy in 2023. Or for Tuvalu, I pledge that we are going to go 100% renewable energy by 2025. If we add all these NDCs of the world in the Pacific together, of the 14 member countries of the forum, it comes to 0.0% reduction of global emissions. That has nothing to do with climate change. We need domestic reduction of greenhouse gases as we pledged in Paris, and perhaps more. Now that we know one country is walking away from the Paris Agreement. We are in dire and serious situation. If that position of the US is going to be allowed and not be filled by us, those who are still in the Paris Agreement, we are done. And the small island countries like Tuvalu, in 50 years, will no longer be there. Will go underwater. Is this a possible scenario for mankind, for humanity to allow to happen? Do you believe that's a way we should allow our fellow people to come to that sort of dilemma? I don't believe so. I think it would be shameful on all of us if we did allow that to happen. We must continue our advocacy. We must call for urgent actions and look at the economies and the benefits of shifting, allowing the experts on these renewable energy technologies to come forward and do their part. I'm sure they will give us a difference. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately we don't have any more time for questions now, but the lady down the back who was very patiently putting up a hand, I'd like to invite her to come up and sit in the table and she can ask His Excellency the questions you wanted to ask during as we break and morning tea, if you'd like to do that. I'd like you to put your hands together for one more round of applause for His Excellency Right Honourable Enele Sopoaga. Thank you.